Good afternoon. Good morning. What stands between you and lunch? This presentation. I asked the gentleman, how long do we have? He said 35 minutes. I said, we will be done in 34 minutes and 40 seconds then. The last thing we want to do is get in your way about this lunch business. I am very pleased to be able to introduce to you two wonderful folks who have spent many years working on the political side of the policy and innovation work that you folks spend your time doing. You've heard today and yesterday from folks who are so intelligent and so creative about how we can protect, enhance, and save our ocean and ocean environment through the use of a variety of modern tools and techniques. And those are all not only true, they are absolutely essential to the notion of being able to reverse many of the scientific changes and trends that we have seen in our environment and especially in the ocean space. However, one area that is, shall we say, a little slow on the uptake with regard to what you've been hearing today is that process and those processes which are the ones which make law. As the person, as Vibe who introduced me said, I had the privilege for 24 years of serving in public life in California, and I can tell you that our friends who work in that space as elected officials, shall we say charitably, do not have the background in the subject matter that you might wish they had. It is a little frightening to think that the people who are making policy in the ocean space in the state waters are folks who, for the most part, did not campaign on and did not come to the office in Sacramento as a senator or an assembly member with a great deal of notion of ocean knowledge on their mind or pressure to act in that subject matter. And that was maybe not so bad when California was a young state. And the challenge at that time in the 1800s, early 1900s, was how do you manage abundance? And so the answer to that question was, from a policy perspective, you did not manage much at all, because there was abundance. If you had your back to the ocean and you were looking landward, you saw herds of deer, you saw all kinds of bountiful and plenty in the terrestrial environment. You turned around, put your back to the mountains and the back to the terrestrial environment, you look into the ocean environment, and it certainly looked to you. I'm from the People's Republic of Santa Cruz, and where I live, and you stand on the cliffs there, the Ohlone Indians 3,000 years ago had that same view that I have standing there at Wilder Ranch State Park on Santa Cruz County's north coast, and it looks the same to me as it looked to them because it is so difficult to perceive in the ocean environment differences. And even when you think you perceive differences, it takes an extraordinarily well-trained eye to understand trends in that ocean environment. And so what we had for a very long time was no management at all, which is, if you think about it for a while, that is a prescription for a serial killing in the ocean environment, species by species. And so as time moved on, what we were able to do in the ocean environment is learn some of the lessons that the environmental movements in the 70s, 80s, and 90s learned in other environments. For example, the rise of the Clean Air Act, the rise of the Clean Water Act, where those literally were motivated. The Clean Water Act, there was a single incident that rallied public opinion and shocked the nation. And that's when a river caught fire in Pennsylvania. Want to hear that again? A river caught fire in Pennsylvania. And that's because the outdated way to think about what you do with pollution is that the solution to pollution is dilution. That we've got so much atmosphere, you can put anything up there and the vastness of the atmosphere will dilute the pollution. There are so many water bodies with so much volume of water in it that if you want to take and pipe the effluent from your manufacturing into a stream, a creek, a river, or the ocean, that was okay, because the volume into which you were placing this pollution would dilute it. So the solution to pollution was dilution. Well, that was delusional. It doesn't work that way. The nature is both more resilient than we think, but also more fragile than we think. And so what arose is when Dr. David Wilmot and when Wendy Wendlandt began working in these subject matters, the whole dynamic shifted from one of passive approaches to the environment, and especially the ocean environment, to active engagement, which the predicate of that is good, sound, iterative science. It is an environment in which there are stakeholders who have huge personal histories and stories about how their family and their grandparents and their great-grandparents were fishers, and they want to pass this along. And they are the best stewards of the environment because they're out there every day. That's a hard argument to push back against. It's an argument that you ought not to push back against. What you ought to do is envelop that argument with the arguments of folks who have the kind of training necessary to see some of the broader patterns that are occurring in the ocean environment. And so it's my belief, anyway, that where we are at today is that the kinds of tools and technology that you are seeing here can be combined with what we now commonly refer to as citizen science, which used to scare the hell out of real scientists, used to scare the hell out of them. And now, because of the technology and equipment being able to be used by individuals so that the data is cleaner, then the gathering of the data and the analysis and the application of the data to problem solving is much more relevant. But where we work is in the political environment. We work in the Capitol in Sacramento. We work in the Capitol in Washington, D.C. And although you have got a large body of folks who are really interested in doing something, it is hard to find those people in elective office or candidates for elective office who will say what is being said around here and what gets said in similar kinds of conferences throughout our state and throughout our country. And that is that what is in danger here is in the kind of danger that is literally existential in nature. And so the solutions to that are going to need to be broad-based. And in order to accomplish that in a legislative environment, the ocean needs to have a way to speak. As predecessors at this podium today have said, and yesterday, the ocean does amazing things, absolutely remarkable activities that it's engaged in. Every other breath we take is from the ocean. An enormous amount of the protein that people consume in various parts of the world comes from the ocean. You know much more about this than I do. But what we also know is the ocean can't speak. It can do terrific things, but it can't speak. And so we need to be the proxy for the ocean in terms of a voice for the ocean. And that's the kind of work that David and Wendy do every day and every way. So it is a pleasure for me. What we are going to do is I am going to introduce these two very smart and capable folks who work in the political space. And I want to just pause on that before I introduce them. My guess is when you hear that someone is a politician, or you have a friend who's their uncle is a politician, or their aunt or something, you probably think, geez, that's kind of a sad family, isn't it? Just too bad they couldn't find honest work. Oh my goodness. What will become of their children? And, fair enough. But the other side of that coin is that these elected officials are in fact going to do something. And they are going to do lots of somethings in the space you care about. And the issue is, as far as I can tell, is how do you identify, nurture, and encourage, and then influence through information those folks who are going into that world of public policy making, making law, directing the regulatory architecture of the state or federal government in the ocean space. How those folks with the same shared values that we have in this room have a fighting chance to get there, and then once they get there, to be successful. What I think we can all tell you is this, is that there are very few districts relatively in the nation where in a congressional race, one of the top 3 issues is going to be ocean. They're going to be relatively few. You would think, well, my goodness, the coast of the United States, practically everything, a huge amount of coastline in the United States. That's absolutely true. But it is not true that every single coastal district has a high priority for their legislator to be working on coastal issues. So how we can find, identify, encourage, and nurture and help achieve good public policy is a function of getting engaged in and remaining engaged in all the way through the spectrum of the political process. That starts with campaigns and ends with passing law. These great folks are going to give you an idea of the kind of work that Ocean Champions and the Public Interest Research Group and others do in the United States to try to encourage you in all of these other ways that you are being encouraged to connect and act. How you can do that in that space that many people recoil from. Many people recoil. It's understandable, especially right now in our country, the sort of, if it's at all possible, the cheapening of the political conversation. You may have thought 2 years ago or 4 years ago or 8 years ago, gee, this politics stuff is so rough and tumble and the language that's used and you kind of look fondly for the days of 2015, right, when things were all kind of golden and glowy. But what we know about this time is that when there are these great challenges, these enormous existential challenges, not only in the ocean, but to the body politic and its ability to function, that is exactly the time that committed, intelligent people need to absolutely rush into that space. Because what these people can also tell you is politics like nature, politics like nature abhors a vacuum. Do not think for 1 second that if people turn off to it, it will calm itself down. That won't happen. Politics, like nature, abhors a vacuum. It will be filled. If you don't fill it, it will be filled. So how we, as intelligent, mindful, thoughtful folks, engage in this successfully is what we want to share for a few minutes with you. First, let me start with Dr. David Wilmot. David Wilmot is a recognized marine scientist, has been in this work for a very long time. 14, now 15 years ago, co-founded Ocean Champions, which is, I will have to say by way of disclosure, I'm the chair of the board of Ocean Champions, so if I sort of hype this one, you can understand. But David is a remarkable spokesperson for face of the fight for the oceans in Washington, D.C. He co-founded Ocean Champions. They've been in that for 7 election cycles. This is the 8th election cycle. They have a strategy and a technique for electing ocean champions that he will want to speak to you about. So would you please be kind enough to welcome David Wilmot.
Thank you, Fred. If I can take you back with me to election night, November 2014. Not 2016, that nightmare is still fresh on our mind. Let's go back a couple of years before that. I happened to be in Tallahassee, Florida at an election party, and former Senator and former Governor Graham was introducing his daughter, Gwen Graham, who was going to be announced as the winner in the congressional district in the Tallahassee area, Congressional District 2. She had just defeated Steve Sutherland. Steve Sutherland was the incumbent congressman from the district who was the chair of the Ocean Subcommittee on the Natural Resources Committee in the House. So this is the guy who set the agenda for oceans in the House, who had for the previous number of years used his political clout to undermine ocean conservation at every turn, against national ocean policy, against our policies for sustainable fisheries, all for drill, baby, drill. This is the man who earned the moniker of Ocean Enemy #1. Ocean Champions identified him out of all 435 House members and 100 senators. He was Ocean Enemy #1 in the 2014 election. And we had just helped defeat this man. During the election, actually right before the election, Gwen Graham's political strategist had said publicly that Ocean Champions had the right message to the right people at the right time to help have the maximum impact on that election. And that night we called him immediately after the results were announced. And he said to us that it's not an overstatement to say that she very likely wouldn't have won without Ocean Champions. She won by 2,500 votes. Now let's remember, a congressional district is well over 700,000 individuals, and she won by only 2,500 votes. This was one of our most exciting achievements, and when I say our, what was so encouraging about this, I don't mean Ocean Champions. I mean the ocean community writ large. In the days and weeks following this, so many people came up to me and said, "We won," meaning we, the oceans, won, not just Ocean Champions. The reason I share this story is because elections matter. Fred did a wonderful job of articulating the connectivity of what we've been talking about here and what so many of you do in different ways with different organizations, different arenas that we all are engaged in around caring for our oceans. But at the end of the day, if one cares about public policy, and let's make no mistake about it, for all the great innovation, technology, market forces that are a critical part of protecting and saving our oceans, we still need public policy. Jim Moriarty earlier today put the large march up on the screen from the Women's March and said, of course, this is outdated. He would now put the Young People's March up. They weren't marching for any reason other than, hopefully, to translate that into public policy. So if one cares about, in our case, the oceans, you must engage with the elected officials who are working to enhance the things that you're trying to accomplish. And how does one do that? One does that no better way than to get them elected and re-elected. They can't do the types of things that Vipe identified that Fred did in the California Assembly, leading the country in passing important ocean legislation that then turns into real action in the ocean. They can't do that if they're not elected. And then holding the same folks accountable. And again, there's no other way to hold them accountable other than to do what we did to Steve Sutherland. And that is be able to create a real threat that you will throw them out. As excited as I was to see the young people marching last week, talking to my colleagues who've been doing this a lot longer than I have and a lot smarter than I am, they're still not sure what that will translate into when it matters, which is in November. That's what this is about. This isn't just about Donald Trump. This isn't about just an ocean enemy. This is about, do we make the type of change so that enough leaders can prioritize the issues that we care about? So the night that we defeated Steve Sutherland, we also had endorsed and financially supported over 50 candidates who won. We were very proud of that in 2016, even with the fiasco of President Trump. We again helped elect over 50. We currently have over 70 ocean champions in the House and the Senate. So these are individual, yeah, thank you. So these are individuals that have shown the leadership or leadership potential that justify us putting your hard-earned money into their election and re-election efforts to get them there so that they can make that difference. Now let's keep it in perspective. We have 535 members of the House and the Senate, and we have around 72 ocean champions. Still very meaningful. And so my message to you is that we have turned oceans into a real political issue for the first time. With the creation of ocean champions, the work that we do, sending a shot across the bow by defeating a Steve. Imagine members of Congress realize 2 incumbent Republicans lost in 2014, 2 in the United States, 1 in Nebraska and Steve Sutherland. We spent more money, because let's be honest, what this is about is money. Ocean Champions spent more money than any outside group not associated with the party or the candidates, more than any other group. Imagine members of Congress when they found out, wait, he was defeated by an ocean political group? Oceans? Are you kidding me? Believe me, they pay attention now when we start defining who's going to be our next ocean enemy number 1. Hello, Dana Rohrabacher. So I'll pause there. We want to leave some time for questions because I want to give you guys a chance to talk about how you can engage, because this is all about you helping us accomplish what we all know together we need to achieve.
Thank you, David. Thank you, David. We are very fortunate to have with us Wendy Wendlandt, who is the political director of the Public Interest Network. Those of you who have been around political work at all know that in general, there are a couple of ways to go about trying to affect elected officials. One of them is this sort of lobbying world, and you're engaged in activity where you're trying to testify in front of Congress and get markups done in bills and that kind of thing, very, very much the nitty-gritty of it all. And the other one is the ability to place pressure on elected officials in their districts as regularly as needs to be done, so that there is no run and hide safe place for them on issues. And U.S. PIRG has for decades and decades and decades been the place that focuses in specifically on keeping that pressure ratcheted up, focused, intense, so that it doesn't wane as a political issue is moving along through Congress. And as it is emerging as an issue in the body politic, nobody is better at that, in my estimation, in this country than is both the Public Interest Network and Wendy Wendlandt. Wendy?
Thank you, Fred. So it's funny that David Wilmot chose to tell that story. I don't know if he even knows this because I wasn't working directly with him, but in that election, in the Sutherland election, a few weeks before the election, I got a phone call from the House Majority PAC, which helps to elect good Democrats to Congress. And they said, we have some folks who would really like to see some more work done in this district in Florida. Can you guys help? And we, in fact, said, yeah, we have a little bit more capacity. One of the contributions that we make to the electoral world is we knock on doors, which probably some of you know in CalPERG and Environment California here in California. We knock on doors. That's how we get a lot of that's how we keep the pressure on all kinds of issues on an ongoing basis throughout the year. But in the election cycle, we take the opportunity to actually go out and knock on doors specifically about candidates. We call that independent expenditure activity. And so we said, yeah, we can run a canvass office in that district. So we participated in that election. It was really fun to work with Ocean Champions on that and go door to door in that district, which, you know, in a congressional district, you can make a pretty big difference with a, you know, I mean, it's not small. I mean, it costs money. It costs, I can't remember, probably $150,000 to run an office there for 4 weeks, 6 weeks, and have 25 people going out every day knocking on doors. So it's not a small thing, but it can make a big, big difference in an election. So anyway, that was the first time that we worked closely with Ocean Champions was on that race. So that's a fun story. Let me just say, I think there's 5 ways that we think about engaging in elections, which are just sort of useful for those of you who may not be like me waking up every morning thinking about how are we going to influence this election this year? What are we going to do to get ourselves out of this mess that we're in? One is voter registration. I personally spend a lot of time on that. I mean, I don't mean I spend a lot of time myself registering voters, but we do a lot of voter registration. We're launching a program in the next few weeks, not here in California, but in other states, to register about 200,000 African American and Latino voters. So voter registration is one of the most powerful and exciting ways that we can change the electorate. We can actually change who it is that has the ability to vote. All this talk about young people, I mean, in 2014 in the midterm elections, 21% of eligible young people went to the polls to vote. That's 1 in 5. And one big problem with young people is they don't get themselves registered in enough time. So they get excited on election day, but they're not registered. You cannot turn people out who are not registered to vote. So voter registration, particularly young people, super important. The next thing is helping people to turn out, to remind them that it's election day, to remind them that there is something that matters on the ballot to them, to connect those old white men who are running for office with the fact that they care about the oceans or guns or whatever the issue is that they care about. So voter registration is number 1. Helping people, reminding people, cajoling people, tag, bag, and drag, as we like to call it in the business, to vote is the second thing. The third thing is you can make contributions. You can give those directly to candidates. You can give them to PACs like Ocean Champions or to Environment America Voter Action. But if you can make a contribution, I mean, I worked for much of the 90s for campaign finance reform, so I do not love the campaign finance system, but it's the system we have, so engage. The next thing is endorsements, whether that's, working with groups like ours to, help us understand who the candidates are and help us figure out which candidates are the ones that we should endorse, who really is passionate about the oceans, who's going to be a champion, who's going to be the Fred Keeley of the Congress? You know, who is it that will actually speak for us when they get in there, and that has the potential to win? I mean, I'm a very practical person, so I'm always worried that we get excited about somebody who is going to be kind of perfect, but they're never going to win. And I'm telling you, in these Orange County districts, which I know a lot of people in this room probably are excited about, I mean, the Darrell Issa seat or the Dana Rohrabacher seat, I think we have to be practical. I mean, those seats are, there's a lot of people who are not our people in those districts. The great thing about the oceans issue, I was just talking to Dan Jacobson, who some of you know, who's the executive director of Environment California, and he was saying he's seen polling in those districts which show that oceans actually is one of the issues that will most turn out, you know, even Republicans in those districts. So I think we're in a good position, but we should be realistic that some of those districts are not Santa Monica or Santa Cruz. So we should get a good person, but we should be, Fred and I were talking this morning, we were saying it would be fine if we got someone who would vote with us 6 out of 10 times instead of 1 out of 10 or no out of 10. And then the last thing I would say is the thing that Fred talked about initially, which is just ongoing advocacy. You know, you have to engage, you have to, if everyone in this room made a point of getting a meeting with their member of Congress, their current member of Congress, whether that's Ed Royce or Dana Rohrabacher or whoever it is, and actually talk to them about the issues, that would be huge. You don't understand how little contact there is with just people who care about the issue with the actual elected officials. That's the other concern I have about all the marches. It's great to be marching, but if you're not in there talking to them face to face, it's easy to just push it off as being not about me, not going to have an impact on me. I'm talking about if you're an elected official. So I'll stop there, and thanks for the opportunity to talk to you about elections, because I think it's exciting what everybody is doing to, you know, build the kind of a new economy, but we have to remember that government does have a big role in whether or not we have an ocean to swim and fish and surf in. Thanks.
Good. So we just have a couple of minutes here, so I'm going to take the opportunity to ask each one of these folks one question. David, it's a big country. The entire House of Representatives is up every 2 years. A third of the United States Senate is up. Assuming there are not inexhaustible resources, where are the opportunities in the 2018 election cycle for electing ocean champions and defeating ocean enemies?
There are a number of opportunities. I think all of you who are following the election even casually have realized that more districts than normal are in play. More states than normal are in play. The Trump effect is certainly having an impact here. So whether we're talking about some of the Southern California districts that you guys are very familiar with, a district like Washington where a long-term Republican incumbent is retiring. We have some new opportunities on the East Coast down in Florida. Again, a long-term Republican is retiring. So we will be looking at a couple of dozen, we are looking and tracking already, a couple of dozen races, some of them that in a normal election, a traditional election, we wouldn't be looking at, where we have a real opportunity to go in and make a difference early on to build the relationship, help this person get elected, then they're much more likely to be there, as Wendy was describing, on our issues. So I think we'll be beginning to roll our endorsements out. We've started already. So I encourage all of you to watch us as we try to help you. You guys provide input back to us to let us know if we're missing folks. But we'll be rolling them out between now and into the summer on where those opportunities are for people to get engaged. Even if you don't live in a district, you can't vote there, there are other things that you can do to help others get engaged to vote. So it's a good election potentially for the oceans and the issues that we care about.
Wendy, let me ask you this. Those who preceded us to the podium today, one of the gentlemen who was up here made a repeated point about it is the stories that matter. The stories really matter. And he even asked a couple of folks who were up here, tell us your story. How did you fall in love with the ocean? What caused you? At what age? How did that work? What intrigues me about that question is that California in particular, and many coastal states in general, are becoming younger and browner. And yet, when we look at many of the conferences that we go to, younger is here, browner not so much. How do you identify, how do we in a political context, in a state and a nation that is changing and not going backwards, it's changing going forwards in terms of the demography, where that voter turnout and participation is low, where is the motivation to, on the environmental side or the ocean side, with that constituency? How is it that we engage and not in a patronizing way, but how do we engage in a successful way?
Well, I think we're finding, I mean, as some of you probably know, CalPERG works on college campuses across the state, mostly the UCs, so not so much the state or community colleges. And it's actually our experience that young people coming up are concerned about the environment and they're getting involved. So in some ways, I think it's just an evolution that we will get to, you know, as the demographics change, we will start seeing a change in the constituency that's out there. But I think a huge problem for us on the environment is the competition with all of the other issues. And I don't mean that in a bad way. I mean, you know, there's a lot of really important issues, whether it's gun safety or immigration. And I think as environmentalists and people who are focused on working to prioritize, whether it's, because even in the environmental community, it's, you know, we're concerned about oceans and we're concerned about global warming and we're concerned about the forests. And I mean, it's a crowded field to get our issues to be high enough for people to take action. So it's a little bit like when you're talking about the Cuyahoga River burning in, you know, in the 60s. And I always think in California, for me, the oil spill, I wasn't here, but I mean, to this day, that's the thing that people, when they relate to the idea of why we should not be drilling off the coast of California, I think in their mind, at least I'm thinking about the Santa Barbara oil spill and the birds covered in oil, and more recently, obviously, the BP oil spill. But I think, I mean, so I don't want to be saying what we need is a tragedy to motivate people, because that's obviously not what I mean. But we do have to figure out how do we get people to understand the gravity of the situation that we're in and see it as an issue that they need to take action on. I think young people get it. I mean, they get that it's a problem, but there's just a lot of noise out there that we have to compete with.
Last point, my experience in the California legislature as the state is continuing to grow and change is that this already democratic state is becoming more democratic. The growth in the Democratic caucus in the Assembly and in the Senate is due largely to increased numbers of Latino Democrats. What's interesting to me about that is that growth, if you plotted the ideologies on a spectrum within the Democratic caucus in the Assembly or the state Senate, what you would see is that the growth of the caucuses, the Democratic caucuses, is to the middle. Because Democrats already have every urban seat. Republicans already have every rural seat. And where the change in the caucuses from Republican to Democrat is taking place is in the suburban and suburbanizing areas, especially an hour or two inland from the coast. And within that demographic group, in the legislature, jobs and housing trump almost everything. Because that is the need in the community. So how we also take that better life, which for many in the Latino community is about that next step up from renter to home ownership, from unskilled job to skilled labor, is a function of education in many cases, but it's also about a very big issue in the Latino community is health. And that is our opportunity for the window we can open about the health of the environment in terms of the health of the community. We do find, for example, childhood asthma clusters in low-income Latino communities. So our opportunity is there to be able to make that connection. So when CalPIRG or Environment California has a drive for public education, information, voter registration, those connections really matter. When Ocean Champions is talking about issues, it is very important that they do that in coastal districts as it relates to many smaller cultures in our community. Communities from moving to California from Asia, what their views are of seafood issues, what their views are of maintenance of the coast and ocean, how we then speak in the buyer's language. There are a lot of entrepreneurs up here today. It is important for the seller to speak in the language of the buyer. And so rather than the preaching to the converted or unconverted, it is more selling to a buyer. And in that case, it seems to me that we have an opportunity to use many of the tools that were on display here today that we can adapt to the political environment, to organizing, to informing, to educating. We do still stand between you and lunch. Let me see if what we could do is take one question, and then you are dying. You are not going to, you won't let us leave. Please.
David Wilmot, could you please speak about the March for the Ocean?
Oh, the March for the Ocean.
Thank you.
No, good question.
Thank
The
you.
March for the Ocean is coming up in June, and it's going to be,
June 9th.
yes, June 9th. Not only in Washington, D.C., that's where the main
Could
march
I introduce
will
our
be,
third panelist to us?
but all around in other areas. And if you are unfamiliar with it, I encourage you to go online and get information. If you cannot go to Washington, D.C., find out where you can get engaged in March. And this brings up that there is not one solution or one answer, as we all know, to what we're trying to accomplish with the oceans. Don't misunderstand, I think Wendy and I both kind of made this backhanded comment and smack at marches. Marches can be a very important step. They can be very influential when followed by action, real action, because you guys have probably read the NRA's money skyrocketed after the Parkland shooting. As soon as people start going after the NRA, they raise more money. More importantly, most members of Congress looked at that march and did not bat an eye, because they know for a fact that in their district, the young people will not turn out and vote. It is that matter of fact. Well, guess what? They often think that about us as well. So let's, if we're going to go do marches and we're going to engage, let's connect this to the type of activism that they understand. They understand what happens at the ballot box. And that is the key step that we must add to it. So I encourage everybody, go online, find out about the March for the Ocean, but also look at this next step, this electoral connectivity, and realize that that is the hammer that you can view as a carrot or a stick. They understand. If they understand nothing else, they understand their constituents, and are they going to punish them, and are they going to reward them? What we want to show them is that we're paying attention, and we will reward them. I think that Fred's language, if you listen, was so positive. We have an issue that is down here. We have to reward, let them see their benefits to getting engaged, whether that's minority communities showing benefits, elected officials. Show them there are some benefits to engaging in oceans, and guess what? They're not that partisan. They're not going to get beaten up if they do some good things on the oceans. So this is generally a carrot in every way for all of us. Think of it in a constructive, proactive way, not in the negative.
Wendy, David, thank you very much. Enjoy lunch.